Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. In today's episode, I welcome Dr. Alison J. for a super interesting conversation around vibrational energy, business, abundance, happiness, and a whole lot more. Now, before your inner skeptic takes hold, I'd encourage you to open your mind and listen to this. It's not as woo-woo as you may think. In fact, a lot of this conversation makes a lot of logical sense, and I really find it fascinating. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. K's practice, you can go to her website, vibrationalupgrade.com. She's written 4 books, which are available on Amazon. And on YouTube, if you look up Alison J. and that's Alison, middle initial J, and her last name is Kay. You'll find it on YouTube and on Amazon. She's also got a Facebook group as well, and you can sign up and get some resources there. I'll put all those links and notes in the show notes and in the description box on YouTube below. I really want to just also say thanks for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my shows and providing me feedback, whether that's an email, a text message, or just taking me aside when you see me at a networking event or something and telling me how you enjoyed a conversation. It means a lot to me, so thank you. Finally, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this show, my contact info will also be in the show notes. You can drop me an email or you can call me directly. Let's chat and find a good time to get you on the show. It really is easy. It's just a conversation. For anyone that's a little bashful, it's really not a big deal, and I think you'd have some fun. So without further delay, let's get on to the show. Hey everyone, I'm Gordon Coyle. Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Today I've got Dr. Alison K with us. We're going to talk about some interesting ideas around energy and changes in our world and what's going on in our minds. And I don't want to give away the farm. So why don't I just ask you, Alison, why don't you take a few minutes, introduce yourself, and tell us what you do and what your experiences are.
Oh boy, just a few minutes, yeah?
Take your time.
Hi, Gordon. Hi, everybody. So I was my first career was in politics, and I wanted to change the world. And so I was a very strategic organization. I was hired to work as a manager and political consultant that wanted to get people elected to state and federal offices that would write legislation that would help protect the environment and work with the global warming. This is back in the late 90s. I ended up really having a lot of success, got the first Latina woman elected to the California State Assembly, and she wrote legislation that saved the last green space in LA Basin. And I ended up going for my master's in public administration and environmental and political policy. And then when I got out and I attempted to job place, it wasn't, that sense when like doors aren't opening as easy as we perceive they quote unquote should be. And so, yeah, I did the reevaluation. And what I realized was, okay, go rely on your bachelor's in English Lit, Alison, into the classroom and teach. And if you want to change or help raise the consciousness, do it one person at a time with the energy medicine I had been learning. And I had been, when I was stressed out during the political work, I learned to meditate. I had a book fall off the shelf, literally that kind of a thing. And it was on meditation. So I learned to meditate. And by the point of my graduating from my master's, I had been teaching locally to adults and then took it into the classroom. And also with a male colleague of mine, formed a meditation and stress reduction club for particularly middle school age boys who were getting the ADD, ADHD label thrown at them. So I took that experience in energy medicine and meditation, and then realized 2.5 years into the classroom teaching with that side gig hey, this isn't cutting it. My life is meant to be happier and more joyful and more abundant, and this isn't that. So I, just kind of started to ask some questions. I could talk about this later. And got led intuitively to the international school system, and did what I had to do, flew where I had to fly, interviewed with the various school heads from around the world, got job offers, accepted one over in Taiwan, and was there for 10 years. And what I was doing was I increased my net cash flow by 60%. And I was tucked away during the market crash, safely gaining in my abundance and prosperity, while also still running the energy medicine sessions on the side, teaching meditation to the high school students. And that was really fun, creating psychology courses based in what was my first major that I left because I felt like it was too focused on problems and proving that there were a science and looking at the hardwiring and the application of psychology to capitalistic purposes and industrial purposes, and not answering the question I had, which is how do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves. So I left that major. So the bottom line is I ended up integrating what I had been gaining in Eastern practices with what I was trained in the West. And so I came back and dropped the classroom teaching in 2010 and took this as a full-time business, and I wrote 4 books, all #1 bestsellers. Just came back from 7 weeks in the UK training people in the system I developed called Vibrational UPgrade, which is a combination of applied mindfulness from my meditation and yoga teacher background, certified in India, and then also my 5 different energy medicine modalities I had learned that I combined into one. So it's a combination of um, applied mindfulness, looking at your thoughts, as well as the energy medicine use to help shift into thoughts that and your, I don't know how to say this without teaching anything, but the body has consciousness all through it. The liver has a consciousness, our toes have a consciousness, and all of that gets generated by the thoughts that we're not even hearing that we think, the ones that are what I call the back of the house consciousness, the subconscious and unconscious, which gets formed from a bunch of different ways: trauma, parental imprints, conditioning, karma, in other ways. So recognizing the bottom line is that our power is over ourselves, not the external world. And so doing the work internally then creates the change externally. In fact, the traditional Chinese medical tenet is where qi goes, which is energy or vital life force, blood follows, meaning where energy goes, the invisible, subtle energy goes, the physical follows. And quantum physics has, been picking that up for the last 10 years or so.
Interesting. So quite a bit to unpack there.
Indeed.
So let's look at that from a business perspective. And we talked about this a little earlier. Where are we in business today from your perspective compared to where it was, let's say, 10 years ago? And how is it different and why is it different?
Okay, so here's another story. In about 2011, I had been back for about a year dealing with the worst culture shock I had. I had traveled all throughout Southeast Asia, and at other times in my life had lived outside of the United States. But this was the worst culture shock, coming back to my home country. And I'll never forget getting interviewed by a guy, mainstream media, back in 2011. And when I was talking about some of this, he's like, "Isn't this stuff all just woo-woo?" And I said to him, and I was surprised by my response, when over half of the rest of the world lives from the understanding that the inside is more important than the outside, and has for eons, I find it rather ignorant at this point to just label the ancient wisdom that has been on this planet for over 5,000 years, like the yoga and meditation teachings and traditional Chinese Qigong, or which I also teach, or Tai Chi, which is building up from Qigong, and traditional Chinese medicine like acupuncture, just dismissing it all because I'm uncomfortable with stuff that I can't prove, is ignorant. So about that same time frame, Voice America approached me and asked me to have a radio show on their platform about the Mayan galactic alignment of December 21st, 2012. Now, I was doing nothing in my business with that at all. In fact, what I had been doing, Gordon and listeners, which is, you'll find interesting likely, is I came back expecting to talk about holistic health and wellness and yoga and meditation and the spiritual path. And the people that were put in front of me at the workshops I offered, instead, I couldn't get through to them because they were so worried about money. Now, like I said, I had been tucked away in Asia for the market crash I came back, more wealthy than I ever had been. And so I asked some questions of them, and I also listened to my own intuitive guidance, which I always have done, and got that I need to get some education on people's money blocks. And so I did that. And I just had workshop after workshop after workshop with people and clients and clients and clients. And I became unexpectedly, ridiculously proficient in understanding why people don't have more money, and the blocks at the unconscious and subconscious level. Again, the thoughts that we don't even hear in meditation, if we even have that kind of a practice, that keep us restrained with our money flows. So I wasn't doing much with the Mayan galactic alignment at all. I had been taking a couple of clients on private retreats down to the Yucatan, to the Mayan ruins, but that wasn't even public facing. It was word of mouth. So anyway, I sat back, said, give me 48 hours, listened to my intuition, and said yes, and ended up interviewing a bunch of experts about what December 21st, 2012 meant. And the bottom line is this: in both the yogic culture and the Mayan culture, as well as Nostradamus predicted this, that in 2012, it was the end of an era we had been experiencing on planet Earth for approximately 26,000 years. 2012 to 2032 is a 20-year window of the most intense human evolutionary change we have ever experienced. That's the subtitle of my second book, Easing Humanity's Evolutionary Transition. My publisher made me include that for a really long, wordy subtitle because he knew what I was up to with my mission. So I became, again, ridiculously proficient in understanding the nature of these times. So the nature of these times is also coined as our spiritual awakening times. And anybody can look around and see more meditation apps. Even before COVID, you could see more yoga studios. You're nodding your head, Gordon. Yep. So that's a hint at something's happening. And what's happening is these spiritual awakening times. Now, people have been reporting more tinnitus or ringing of the ears. People have been having more food allergies. People have been having more skin reactions. Sensitive skin products are out there now for laundry detergents. So these are all examples of that awakening that's happening at a more subtle energy level, which is what I'm an expert in. So the nature of business, therefore, is highly impacted by this. You'll notice that you can't come across as a person just looking for a transaction. I mean, I know New York City is different. I come from Boston, man. I had a lot of clients in 2015 come to me from New York City. It was very interesting timing considering what was happening politically. And through 2015 to about 2017, I had a lot of clients coming to me from New York City and Long Island. It was very interesting. But nonetheless, you'll notice in business, you can't come across as like transactional or as hardcore as much anymore. It's more about really relating to the client or the customer and understanding them in a more, I'm going to use the word holistic way, like what they're, without getting into that, there's a couple of changes, and money itself is changing. Without going into the options we have to pay nowadays, but the nature I find of business, like even as a business owner, like in 2017, I had to do a reevaluation. I'm a CEO of a multiple six-figure business. And I wear a lot of hats and I have a team that I manage. So please don't think, just because I do this stuff that I'm like, hanging out, listening to, some kind of new age music, burning incense and making, 56,000 a year. That's not what's happening here. So how's that for a response to your question? How has business changed?
I think it was pretty complex, but I think just to kind of dive into that a little bit more, I think you were just, you're kind of showing some examples of how everyday life has changed. And
yes.
I think from the business perspective, something that you brought up that I'd like to talk a little bit more about is I think in the past, business was more transactional, and today it's much more relational. And I think
Yes.
I saw on your website that people tend to want to be more of their quote. And for those who are not watching me or listening, I'm using air quotes. They want to be their more authentic self.
Not on my website. I don't say that. But yes, your sense is right, Gordon.
Yeah. So, how do you get from
the alignment,
the
that's right,
transactional to the more
relational,
consultative, relational type of relation that business people have and what you do?
and the authentic self.
Right.
So yeah, so I knew that if I were to continue working in the school system, I would be working according to the conditioning of my culture. That as a woman, I am meant to accept that this is what I could do. And I wasn't at all, my inner voice was saying, Alison, you're meant to live a life of adventure. You're meant to live a life of abundance. Life is meant to be more fun. You're not meant to feel caged. So that was my authentic self. Now, because I've lived my whole life according to my intuition, I mean, I grew up going out into the I lived in the suburbs of Boston. My older brother and I used to tromp through the woods after school every day, and I just felt connected to everything. I would watch the trees, and he'd jump on the tree limbs and break them, or ones that were already dead, and I'd be just like feeling connected with everything and loving where I was. And so I've always felt this sense of falsehood. I knew when something was off. I always knew when, like, I was dating in my 20s, a guy was lying to me, for example. So the idea of the authentic self doesn't work for me because I don't know how to live in any other way. Like, I know when I'm lying to myself. So I think when people say that authentic self, it's a way where you really feel like you're on, and you really feel like you're in a flow, and you really feel like you're being true to yourself, and you're not making those compromises, and you're not shrinking back from life, worried and fearful of what might happen if you did make that choice you really want to make. So the idea of relating with people instead of being transactional is more about how can I best serve you and what you're looking for, rather than let me just get what I need and get out.
Yeah. And I think in my practice, we've blended that relational thing with expertise. And I think that's what a lot of business people are looking for today, is a relationship where you can rely on somebody that gives the expertise of whatever they do,
Yeah,
genuinely to that customer or client.
I know I'm looking for it as a business owner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just got rid of my marketing guy. So yeah, I need him to own his zone while I'm doing my zone. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Now we've talked about, business, awareness of situations, abundance, happiness, mindfulness, yoga, Far Eastern, culture. How do business people open up themselves to think, believe, practice, try this out? You
It's really
mentioned,
basic.
go for it.
Yeah, it's not as oovy groovy as, or out there as like, if you hear the word chakra, you're just like, see ya. Just hang with me for a second here, because I'm really able to, like, my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong, is a huge textbook on how to approach this. And my third book, Reasonable Dragons, which is also on audible.com, is less of a textbook and more graspable. And it just simply starts with, like, listen to your thoughts. So if you're hearing yourself, and let me add this in, typically that version of our authentic self, let me use that term for here. Mm-hmm. Some would say soul, some would say heart, some would say spirit, whatever you would phrase that, okay, or frame that as. If you hear yourself resisting a person, like maybe me, you're resisting what I'm saying right now, the universe very frequently, or our soul, interprets things the exact opposite the way our mind does. And the meditation practices that come from yoga, it's called the ego mind, because it's a part of ourselves that's attached to our egoic personality, right? So you can hear some of the psychology background, the blending of the Western and Eastern here.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we want to really serve someone, and we want to really serve our authentic selves, we want to get beyond that ego mind, because that's where all our conditioning is. That's where our parental imprints are. That's where our limitations are. So if we start with looking at the idea that if I'm fearful about something, it's because there's great power behind it. And so if you think of resistance, a massive component of resistance is fear. So if you're listening to me and you have resistance, it's because I'm turning you on to some more where your power is. And a lot of people, when they come on calls with my team to look into working with me, feel that fear, because I'm one of the people out there who actually walks her talk and can get these changes. I'm not just saying things, I'm working for these changes. So when you hear a thought that is a judgment on someone, I don't like that person, I don't want to work with that person, you could listen to that, and you could tune in a little bit more and ask what that's about. And if it's actually a judgment, lean in to that resistance and go there, because you're going to find much power on the other side of working with that person in a business relationship. If you have judgments about, if you have a bodily sense of feeling, I don't really want to do this, but I know I should. Having that sense of courage right now is really, really important to come out of what is our status quo. Bottom line suggestion I could give is any choices that you're making as a business owner right now that are the typical status quo are really not the best choices in order for your business to thrive now. And that includes you as the head. And I know, Gordon, what do you feel like? I know that I can perceive, like I was just saying this about enterprise rental car. So I go over, I lead these retreats twice a year in the UK. People from all over the world who are working with me come to learn the system I've developed. And I rent a car for 7 weeks. I hire a driver for some of the bigger trips we do to sacred sites, but I drive to some of them. And so Enterprise, is with Alamo. And what's the other one Enterprise is with? Alamo, and there's another one there.
Budget?
Do you remember? Well, whatever the third one is.
Yeah.
It's we were having a chat. The guy, when I dropped off the car, I was asking him for an easier way to do this. And he was telling me that another car rental company doesn't cap their prices in the summer, but Enterprise does. They have something called an ethical pricing because they're a family-owned business out of America. So I found that really interesting, because I know when I look at it, I've always preferred Enterprise. I'm not trying to do a sales for Enterprise. I know I don't own any stock in Enterprise, but but I always had a feeling like I gravitated towards them. So the bottom line is pay more attention to what you are feeling and what you're thinking. Slow down, oh New York City people, and give yourself more space to relate to your thoughts and observe your sensing in your body, because that contains so much more information that's actually going to help save you time than quick snap judgments that your ego mind is generating. Does that make sense to begin with?
Yeah, and I wrote down 3 words during that conversation: limitations, fear, and resistance. And all that came to my mind was, growth is usually very uncomfortable, and people don't normally achieve any growth until they get outside of their comfort zone. So outside of their comfort zone is usually all the fear and all the resistance and all the perceived limitations within their life. So I can see certainly this kind of meshing of ideas. I am a big fan of facing fear and challenging it at every step I can. In fact, I was on a podcast with a buddy of mine, and we talked about fear is really, my acronym of fear is false evidence appearing real, which
Yeah.
I think is very important for people to understand. And I think some of the conversations that we've just had all relate to that, and I think build into what personal growth is all about.
Gordon, have you heard the acronym for fear? False ego, information
No,
appearing real.
no, I've
Yeah.
not.
So that's what I was just doing.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know that my closest friend in college said to me, and I'll never forget this, it was a really keen observation. She's a doctor. Alison, you never let yourself get comfortable. Yeah. So I feel like I want to explain something. Like, if I have a thought that I can observe, which is what the practice of meditation allows for us to do, and I go more into depth in this in my books, is you're observing thoughts, but you're also creating a bit of spaciousness between your thoughts. I'm not suggesting everybody go out there and meditate, because I know that there's resistance to it. But all I am saying is, in your day to day, if you can get out in nature, if you can give yourself longer in the shower or in the bath, or you have a little bit more lay-in time in the morning or in the evening, you quiet down 10 more minutes off the phone, off the devices before you go to sleep. So you just are taking a little bit more space to tune into yourself. And you hear, like, what would help you ask questions, because the universe hates a vacuum. And when we think we know everything, which we want to, our ego mind loves to be right, then that closes doors. But if you think of questions, they open doors. So if you ask a question, just like looking up to the ceiling, what else could I know here that would help me? Watch your next day. You'll get brought in an awareness, a new awareness. Or if you're working with me, part of what I do is the energy medicine clearings I do is to help bring in more synchronicities, so that, like, if you ask that question, you're not only relying on your next quiet space to have your mind bring the answer, or that morning jog or in the shower, but I'm helping to bring in synchronicities where, like, somebody would email you with that opportunity or with that answer, because there's so much going on in the subtle energy forces. There's so much about our energy medicine system that is throughout it's connected from our consciousness. You could think of that as the head. You could think of that as the thoughts you hear and then the thoughts you don't hear, to the body. They correspond to specific parts of the body. Overall, that creates an energy or how you feel about somebody when you get near them. And whatever that energy is doing, it has power to call out to the greater field of the Tao, or the greater field of possibilities. So I help open up people's consciousness and system in a way that it's more functional for them, so that the universe is actually helping them, instead of us going at it, making it happen, striving forward, thinking we have to do it all ourselves. It's meant to be easier.
So how do you do that when you work
So
with people?
yeah, so one of the ways I do that is without giving away trade secrets here, I work on, let's say, there's a chakra called the solar plexus, and that's the power center. It's in your upper gut. If you tend to run anxious, for example, you may burp a lot. You may have gastric upsets. If you tend to really feel a lot of what other people are feeling and take it on as your own, you could also have a sense of gastric upsets, because there's a bunch of different aspects. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the ways I do that is helping to restore the person's integrity of their own system. And I'll run a clearing. I'll get into a certain required space and help that. What I mean is, I'm like a flute that you play. I'm like a flute, and I have recognized each human system of consciousness and subtle energy is like an instrument. And so I rearrange the instrument accordingly to help them get more support with improving the situation, the example I just gave. Or if we're feeling like we have to give and we have to do everything and make it happen ourselves, converting their system into where it's more open to receive help. And that happens somewhat at the third and at the fourth, or the heart chakra. So there's certain specific aspects to each chakra, and I'll clear out blockages and then open up channels so that there's more thoughts and there's more circumstances that come into their life that support the positive or the desired outcome. I hope that that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you say you work with somebody to do this, is that one-on-one sitting with them? Is it on a Zoom call? Is it on a retreat? How do you do that?
All of the above.
Okay.
I don't tend to do as many one-on-ones nowadays. I train people to do one-on-ones. I tend to work more in group programs. I do still have some one-on-ones, but I do group programs. They occur online on Zoom calls, and then phone calls. Like I have one at 8 p.m. tonight for my signature program called Magic Manifestation and Money Flow. And in it, I'm converting people's system, just like I'm talking about right now. I'm converting people's systems and then coaching them to, like, if they say, I've been wanting to get this business booming and it hasn't been. And so I'm slowly introducing, I don't want to say slowly, I'm gradually introducing them to new concepts whilst they're running through videos I've done to open up their system. And they'll be in the third week and they'll say, Alison, I have just had a new opportunity come in. I wasn't on LinkedIn and I had a recruiter reach out to me on LinkedIn with, for an example, a woman who's an accountant. She was working in a corporate accounting firm and she wanted to open up her own business. And so she's in week 4 of the signature program, Magic Manifestation and Money Flow. And she says to me, I had a recruiter reach out to me on LinkedIn with 4 job opportunities. I wasn't even looking. I want to start my own business. And so I said, hold on a second, let me tune in. And so I tuned in and I got that the second and the fourth were the best offers for her to follow up. She did. She ended up being placed into another corporate accounting firm, but one that she could work from home more as a single mom, have more time with her teenage daughter, and had an increased salary, saving her all that running her own business would end up having not given her that this new position did. So there's this guiding force that I listen to where a person can be set up for their highest and best, so to speak, where we get our own thoughts, our own preferences out of the way, and we just see what else is possible. And so I can set up the consciousness. I'm not saying I'm doing anything to manipulate you or your thoughts. I'm just clearing out where there's false evidence appearing real.
Interesting perspective. Now, I can imagine people listening to this and saying, like you mentioned earlier, oh, this is just too woo-woo for me.
Indeed.
I'm not trying to sell you or your services. I'm just trying to think of, there's
thanks.
No, I guess the point is that, people experience blockages, whether they call them mental blocks or energy blocks, or
they're both
spiritual career blocks. They just can't get ahead and they just can't figure out where the blockage is happening. Mm-hmm. So, I'm just kind of thinking as the devil's advocate, well, if you had a blockage, who would you go to? I mean, if you had a blockage in your stomach, you'd go to a gastroenterologist, but not talking about that kind of a thing, just trying to talk about if you weren't succeeding where you thought you should, and you're putting in true energy and effort into whatever you're doing, who would help you resolve that situation? Maybe a therapist, maybe a coach, maybe somebody in what you do, right?
Yeah, Gordon, I got to say, I hear the New York conservatism in there. I'm not trying to sell your product. I love that you said that. You're asking such great questions, and pulling out of me such great responses. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Great.
As my first podcast interview since returning to the States after 7 weeks. So the talk therapy doesn't work in my view, and coaching is all intellectual in my view, because it's in my view, it's in people's opinions. What I do is you can hear me on my events. I say, hold on a second, let me tune in. That's my opinion. Let me move beyond my opinion. Hold on, let me tune in. That's my mind. That's my experience. That's my intellect. When people are asking me different questions about their business, for example. And so I'll tune in and I will just get to the heart of it, and then I will clear out the blockage so that it's happening a lot quicker than just going through talk therapy or going to a coach. That's the whole point. I mean, if you look back at the question I asked when I was running those energy medicine sessions back in the late 90s, and I said, how can I get even better results or more robust results for my clients? Here I am today with this system. It's quick and it's fast. And in America, if we continue to ignore and only stick to the physical, we're going to continue to suffer. That's the whole message of my first book. Our power is in our consciousness, and then the energy that's attached to it. And if we continue to remain ignorant of it, then we're going to continue to suffer when there is so much more thriving possible, because that's the bottom line. I'm not focused on blockages. There's so many new possibilities as anyone can glean on our suffering planet right now. It's an intense time, but it's also an auspicious time. And we are not meant to be suffering. We're meant to be moving out of the old forms of suffering and really moving into living up to our fullest potential. You can hear my voice. I'm speeding up because this is where I am the most juiced, is not to work in people's problems. And people come to me with gastrointestinal issues and colonic cancer. And I've worked with that successfully, and there's been a couple of cases with colonic cancer where I've been able to keep it so contained with the work that I've done that they go in, they get their surgery, they get it cut out. They don't need morphine. The nurses and doctors are surprised at their recovery time, that they don't use morphine and that it doesn't ever come back. And those are just a couple of examples. I don't like to do many more. I don't like to do health as much anymore because it's heavy. Yeah. But this is all interconnected. I mean, what's going on in our body is evolutionary of our mind creating thoughts that have a certain pathway that if they repeatedly travel, it creates the physical. It's the physical that's last. It's where our focus is that moves energy, and then the energy makes a deposit somewhere. And if we keep thinking in the same way, it will keep, like a bulldozer or a snowplow, moving in the same direction, and it will eventually become physical. You can use that to your advantage. You can have it work against you. Why not get educated about it?
Yeah, and I could hear your excitement kind of like spark up right away when you started talking about that in this section.
Yeah.
So if this is a new conversation that people that are listening have never heard before or have never really experienced about energy, the inside versus the outside, and mindfulness, if somebody had just a spark of curiosity, where would they start to just take the first step to learn more about it?
Go to Audible and get my book, Reasonable Dragons.
Reasonable Dragons?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's that going to tell them?
It's going to take this brief synopsis, and it's going to break it down and help them be able to apply it to themselves in a way that makes more sense to their intellect and their logical mind.
Interesting. I'm writing that down.
Really, our power, if you guys don't hear anything else out of this interview today, our power is in our internal, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's just knowing your car, or your devices. You are your body and your mind. Know your system. Know your operating system so you can have it operate optimally. That's all this is.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I want to be respectful of our time today on this call. So did I miss anything that you'd like to kind of get into the conversation before we wrap up?
Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, I want to reemphasize the nature of the times that we're in. They are so intense, but for a reason. They're also meant to be the most auspicious times. I am seeing, you can hear all the juice in that last segment, right? Because with my most advanced students, the ones who just traveled over from all over to the UK to get trained with me, we're living on the cutting edge of possibilities. We're seeing what else can become possible now, because on this planet right now, in the nature of the times we're in, there are brand new possibilities that we're just learning how to ask for. So if you could imagine living at that level, that's what I'm inviting you to. That's what else is possible now. And what I've been saying I don't even say it anymore, but I was saying it for a good solid like 5 to 7 years. If you are addicted to the struggle paradigm, I'm not the right mentor for you. It's not meant to be about struggle anymore.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what's the struggle paradigm?
Yeah, where it's either like, I've got to worry about my living, I've got to worry about my survival, I've got to worry about getting cancer, I've got to worry about the air pollution, I've got to, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough love. This isn't working. If you think of the title of my first book that I wrote starting as my dissertation for my PhD, my 10th year in Asia, what if there's nothing wrong? Our society conditions us to frame our minds in that, what else is wrong here? What else could possibly go wrong here? And that's how it feels living on planet Earth post-COVID. Yep. Oh, inflation. What else is going to be wrong? Like in that preventative fire extinguisher way. And it's because we're meant to be changing right now. So taking the proactive stance, not just preventative, but the proactive stance, there are so many new possibilities that we could be stepping into now. It's a full 10 from the 0 of struggle, worrying about lack, worrying about my business surviving. There's so much more becoming possible right now. And the struggle is there for a reason to help get us out, because I'll look at people who proactively seek me out because they want to live up to their human potential or they want to develop more, right? And then I'll look at the difference of people saying, I've been diagnosed with cancer. You heard me say earlier that I don't work with health issues anymore because it's just too heavy. What I'm talking about is not waiting until something physically manifests like a struggle and instead approaching it proactively. That is the way that you're going to thrive in these times right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff. And I appreciate the conversation.
Me too, Gordon. Thank you.
If people wanted to reach out and learn more about what you do, Dr. K, or get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So my website's vibrationalupgrade.com. That's also the name of my second book. You need my middle initial J, Alison with one L, middle initial J, and then Kay on Amazon to get any of my 4 books, or on YouTube for my YouTube channel. And then Vibrational Upgrade is also the name of my free Facebook group. So vibrationalupgrade.com, my name, Alison, 1L, JKAY.com is also the name of my website. And then that's how you find me on YouTube and on Amazon.
That's great. I will put all of those links and places in the show notes on. So if you're on the treadmill and you don't have a pen handy, you can look at them later. Alison, it was a great conversation. Thanks for being on with me today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for being the first upon my return to the States.
Fantastic. So everyone, my name is Gordon Coyle. I'm the host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this show, give me a call or drop me an email. I'll put my contact info in the show notes as well. And until next time, be well. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.